In September 1939, Europe went to war, but to many observers at the time, it already seemed as though Germany had discovered a completely different way of fighting. Within days, the Polish army was being overwhelmed. Tanks raced across the countryside. Aircraft struck strategic positions. Mechanized units punched deep into enemy lines. The speed was astonishing. To those watching the campaign unfold, it seemed less like a traditional war and more like a machine operating with terrifying precision. But behind that image lies a much more important question. How had Germany managed to get there? Just 2 decades earlier, Germany had emerged from the First World War defeated and humiliated. Its military had been severely restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. Its economy had been devastated by crisis. Hyperinflation had wiped out family savings. Millions were unemployed, and yet, less than 20 years later, Germany was launching military offensives powerful enough to shock nearly the entire continent. So how did this happen? The answer was not a single secret weapon. It wasn't simply better tanks or more advanced aircraft. Germany's transformation came from a combination of massive rearmament, industrial planning, military innovation, intensive training, propaganda, and above all, a radically different approach to using military force. And this is where one of the most remarkable and dangerous stories of the Second World War begins. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, Germany was still officially bound by the restrictions imposed after the First World War. But the new government saw those restrictions not as a permanent obstacle, but as a challenge to overcome. Germany needed to rebuild its military, and it needed to do it fast. The factories began producing weapons on an enormous scale. New military formations were organized. The Air Force was rebuilt. Military training expanded. Roads, transportation networks, and infrastructure were developed. And thousands of men were prepared for a war that, officially, Germany was still forbidden to wage. But there was something even more important happening. Beneath the surface, Germany wasn't simply trying to build a larger army. It was trying to build a more efficient fighting system. The goal was to make soldiers, tanks, aircraft, artillery, transportation, and communications work together as one coordinated force. Imagine 2 armies. The first has thousands of soldiers, hundreds of weapons, and plenty of vehicles. The second has similar resources, but its tanks, infantry, artillery, aircraft, and commanders can coordinate their actions rapidly through reliable communications. Which army would be more dangerous? That difference would soon become obvious on the battlefield, and when Germany finally put its new military system to the test, the results stunned the world. But the most disturbing part was this: Germany's real advantage was only beginning to reveal itself. Before Hitler could conquer large parts of Europe, he first had to transform a defeated nation into a military power. To understand how he did it, we have to go back several years to the moment when Germany began rebuilding its military strength while its future enemies watched, protested, and hesitated. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Germany could not simply recreate the army it had lost after the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed strict limits on the German armed forces. The country was prohibited from maintaining a large air force. Its army was heavily restricted, and the development of certain weapons was forbidden. But there was a crucial difference between being forbidden from doing something and being unable to do it. Germany began exploiting that difference. The government poured enormous resources into rearmament. Military workshops expanded into major industrial facilities. Private companies began producing trucks, engines, aircraft, ammunition, and armored vehicles on an ever-growing scale. At the same time, thousands of young men were being trained to become part of a new German military. Then, in 1935, Hitler made the transformation public. Germany announced the creation of the Luftwaffe and openly expanded its armed forces. It was a direct violation of the restrictions imposed by Versailles, and yet The European powers did not immediately stop it. They protested, they issued warnings, but they hesitated, and that hesitation gave Germany something incredibly valuable: time. Time to build, time to train.
And most importantly, time to experiment. Germany understood that it didn't necessarily need the largest army in Europe. It needed an army capable of moving faster, communicating faster, and concentrating its strength more effectively than its opponents. And that brings us to one of the most important elements of the German military system: communication. A tank operating alone is just an armored vehicle. An aircraft operating alone is just an airplane. Soldier operating alone is still just a soldier, but connect them through radios, mobile command posts, and an efficient communications network, and the battlefield changes. Completely armored units could break through. Aircraft could strike enemy positions. Artillery could support advancing. Formations. Infantry could follow behind and secure the ground. And all of it could happen in rapid succession. That speed was critical. During the First World War, millions of soldiers had spent years trapped in trenches while offensives gained only a few miles of ground. Germany wanted to avoid repeating that nightmare. If another war came, the objective would be simple: break the enemy's lines before the enemy had time to recover. But technology alone wasn't enough. There was another ingredient: experienced German officers studied the lessons of the First World War in enormous detail. They also watched later conflicts and examined how emerging technologies could transform warfare. From this came a military doctrine that emphasized speed, initiative, flexibility, and the concentration of forces at decisive points. It wasn't simply about having better tanks. It was about knowing where to use them, when to attack, and how to turn a small breakthrough into the collapse of an entire defensive system. And then came the test. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland. For the first time, its new combination of preparation, communications, mobility, and concentrated force was unleashed on a large scale. The results were dramatic. Europe began to realize that the problem wasn't simply the size of the German army, it was the way that army had learned to fight. But there was still one enormous piece missing, because an army is only as powerful as the system keeping it supplied. A modern war machine needs fuel, steel, ammunition, engines, spare, parts, trucks, factories, and thousands upon thousands of workers. Capable of keeping the entire system running, Germany understood this very well. Throughout the 1930s, the Nazi regime made rearmament one of the central priorities of the state. Huge investments flowed into heavy industry and strategically important sectors of the economy. The goal was straightforward: prepare Germany for a war that could demand an enormous national mobilization. But there was a problem. Germany did not have unlimited access to the raw materials required for modern warfare. Oil was essential. Rubber was essential. Certain metals were essential. And Germany depended heavily on foreign supplies for many of them. So the government pushed the development of synthetic materials and searched for ways to secure greater control over strategic resources. At the same time, unemployment fell dramatically during the 1930s. Public works projects expanded. Industrial production grew, and rearmament absorbed millions of workers. But there is an important detail that is often overlooked. This transformation did not make Germany economically invulnerable. In fact, the opposite was true. The military buildup consumed enormous amounts of money and raw materials, and it created economic pressures that would become increasingly difficult to sustain. That created another incentive for the regime: find more resources, and territorial expansion offered a brutal answer. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, it gained access to additional resources, financial reserves, industrial capacity, and manpower. Then came the occupation of Czechoslovak territory, and something even more significant followed. Germany gained control of important factories, industrial facilities, and weapons stockpiles, every territorial gain could now strengthen its ability to wage the next war. It was a dangerous cycle. More territory meant more resources. More resources meant greater production. Greater production supported new military operations, and military victories could generate even more resources. But there was another factor behind German military effectiveness: mobility and logistics. The German army relied on thousands of vehicles to move troops. Ammunition, fuel, and equipment, railways, became critical to transporting men and supplies. Logistical networks kept advancing. Units supplied as they pushed deeper into enemy territory, and this mattered enormously. A tank can be one of the most powerful weapons on the battlefield, but once it runs out of fuel, it becomes a very expensive piece of metal. A highly trained soldier can be extremely effective, but without ammunition, food, and supplies, his ability to fight quickly disappears. The real strength of the German military system was therefore not any single weapon. It was the combination of industry, logistics, training, communications, mobility, and command. That combination helped Germany achieve the astonishingly rapid campaigns of 1939 and 1940. But now we reach the most important question of all. If Germany had such serious economic limitations, how did it manage to defeat France so quickly? The answer takes us to the final, and perhaps most surprising piece of the puzzle, because the Germans didn't win simply by possessing more power. They won to a remarkable extent, because they managed to make their enemies react exactly as they wanted. And when that strategy worked in 1940, the balance of power in Europe appeared to change overnight. But that success would soon reveal a dangerous truth. Germany had built a military system designed to win wars quickly. The problem was that the longer the war lasted, the more difficult that system would become to sustain. And eventually, the very strengths that had made Germany so dangerous would collide with its greatest weakness: the inability to fight a long war against a coalition with vastly greater resources.